Blood is thicker than water, right? That's the lie they sell you. They forget to mention that blood can also drown you. Carlotta's parents didn't just ask for her home, they demanded it. And when she said no, her father did something she will never, ever forgive. The private elevator opened directly into Carlotta's foyer with a soft, muted chime. The sound usually brought a wave of relief, a signal that she had successfully walled herself off from the noise of the city, and more importantly, from other people. Today, it sounded like a warning bell. Carlotta stood by the kitchen island, pressing her thumbs into the cold, polished surface of the black granite countertop. She hadn't bothered to turn on the overhead lights. The morning was gray, and the rain lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows cast a bruised bluish light across the living room. Abel and Haley stepped out of the elevator. They brought the smell of damp wool and Abel's overpowering peppermint mints into the sterile, quiet air of the penthouse. Haley was shaking off an umbrella that didn't need shaking, leaving small, dark water spots on the wide plank oak floors. Carlotta watched the water soak into the wood. She didn't say anything. She just felt a familiar, exhausting tightness taking root at the base of her skull. "Nice place, Chloe," Abel said. His voice was too loud for the quiet room. It bounced off the glass and the high ceilings, lacking the warmth of a father visiting his daughter's home for the first time. He didn't look at her. He was looking up, tracing the track lighting, assessing the crown molding. He looked like an appraiser. "You didn't say you were coming," Carlotta said. Her voice was flat. She pulled her oversized cardigan tighter around her ribs. Underneath, she was wearing a faded band t-shirt and pajama pants. She felt messy, caught off guard in her own sanctuary. "It's family. We don't need an invitation," Haley chimed in. Haley dropped her designer leather tote onto the cream-colored linen sofa. The bag had a heavy metal buckle that clanked sharply against the wood frame. Carlotta flinched. Haley wandered toward the windows, her heels clicking aggressively against the floorboards. She was perfectly put together, as always. A beige trench coat, a blowout that defied the humidity, and the subtle, sickeningly sweet scent of vanilla perfume that instantly brought a metallic taste of anxiety to the back of Carlotta's throat. "The view really is something," Haley murmured, pressing her manicured fingers against the glass, leaving a greasy smudge. "Though, honestly, the gray walls are a little depressing. I'd paint this all a warm white, maybe knock down that partition." Carlotta blinked, a slow, deliberate movement. "You would paint my walls." Abel cleared his throat. He walked over to the kitchen island, pulling out one of the leather bar stools. It scraped loudly against the floor. He sat down heavily, leaning his elbows on the granite. The smell of peppermint grew stronger, masking the faint, stale odor of the cigar he'd smoked in the car. "Sit down, Carlotta," Abel said. It wasn't a suggestion. It was the tone he used when she was 12 and had left a bicycle in the driveway. It was the tone that meant an executive order was coming. Carlotta didn't sit. She picked up her glass of iced water. The condensation was freezing against her palm. She held it just to have something anchoring her to the physical world. "I have a conference call in 20 minutes, Dad. Why are you here?" Abel sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose like she was already exhausting him. He looked at Haley, who had turned away from the window and was now standing behind one of the armchairs, her hands resting on the fabric like she was claiming it. "Haley's going through a tough time, Carlotta. You know this," Abel began. Carlotta took a sip of the water. It hurt her teeth. She did know this. Haley's husband had just filed for divorce after finding out about a string of affairs Haley had aggressively poorly hidden. He was keeping the house in the suburbs. Haley was broke, a consequence of maxing out 3 credit cards on luxury vacations she took under the guise of finding herself. "I know," Carlotta said. "I'm sorry, Hales, truly." The words tasted like ash. She wasn't sorry. She was just tired. "She needs a fresh start," Abel continued, his voice dropping into a register of practiced, folksy empathy that he usually reserved for his clients at the dealership. "A place to rebuild, somewhere secure, safe." Carlotta looked between them. A cold, slow dread began to pool in her stomach, the kind of dread that makes your fingertips tingle and your hearing go slightly muffled. She looked at the expensive leather tote sitting on her custom sofa. She looked at Haley, who was biting her bottom lip in a textbook display of vulnerable victimhood. "You want her to move in here?" Carlotta said. It wasn't a question. The absurdity of it made a short, ugly bark of a laugh escape her throat. "Dad, I work from home. This is a one-bedroom with a den. Where is she going to sleep? The couch? No, Abel said. The folksy tone vanished. The salesman dropped the act. He reached inside his damp wool coat and pulled out a thick, manila envelope. He dropped it onto the granite island with a wet, heavy smack. She's not moving in with you, Abel said, tapping the envelope with a thick, calloused index finger. You're moving out. You're going to sign the deed over to your sister. The silence in the room became an actual physical weight. Carlotta heard the hum of the refrigerator. She heard the rain hitting the glass. She felt the ice shifting in her water glass, a tiny, sharp clink. She stared at the envelope. Her brain simply refused to process the sentence. It was like trying to read a language she didn't speak. I'm sorry? Carlotta whispered. The cynical, sharp-tongued woman who ran a logistics company and negotiated multi-million-dollar contracts on a daily basis was completely gone. In her place was a confused, terrified child. Don't be dramatic, Carlotta, Haley said, stepping forward. The vanilla perfume wafted closer. You're single. You work from your laptop. You could live anywhere. I need stability right now. I need an asset. You have so much, and I have literally nothing. It's just a piece of paper. Carlotta's eyes snapped to her sister. It's my home, Haley. I bought it. I paid the mortgage off last year. I worked 80-hour weeks for a decade to buy this. And you can do it again, Abel interrupted, his voice rising, filling the room, pushing Carlotta back against the sink. You've always been good at making money. Haley isn't. She's fragile right now. She's your sister. Family takes care of family. Carlotta looked at her father, the man who had missed her high school graduation to go golfing, the man who had co-signed Haley's first auto loan but told Carlotta to get a waitress job to buy a bus pass. A sickening, familiar, internal contradiction twisted her gut. Even now, even in the face of this grotesque demand, a pathetic, microscopic part of her still desperately wanted him to look at her with pride, to say, "You did good, kid." Instead, he was looking at her like she was an obstacle, a stubborn tenant standing in the way of a real estate deal. Carlotta set the water glass down. Her hand was shaking so badly the glass rattled against the granite. She hated that they could see it. She hated her own weakness. No, Carlotta said. Her voice cracked. She cleared her throat, swallowing the sour bile that was creeping up her esophagus. No, absolutely not. Abel's face darkened. The skin around his jaw tightened, the gray stubble bristling. He slid the manila envelope across the counter toward her. It stopped inches from her hand. I went to the lawyer yesterday, Abel said, his tone low. Dangerous. It's a standard quitclaim deed. All you have to do is sign it. I even brought a notary seal. We can take care of it right now. You pack a bag. Go stay at a hotel for a few weeks. Figure out an apartment. Haley moves in this weekend. Carlotta stared at the envelope. There was a bright yellow sticky tab on the edge of the paper, pointing to a blank line. Sign here. It was so aggressively mundane. They were trying to steal her life with office supplies. Are you insane? Carlotta said. The shock was starting to burn off, leaving behind a hot, blinding rage that made her skin prickle. You come into my home that I bought, and demand I give it to Haley because she couldn't keep her legs shut in her own marriage? Carlotta! Abel slammed his hand on the counter. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. Carlotta jumped, her shoulder slamming into the edge of the refrigerator. Haley gasped, pressing her hands to her mouth. You are so cruel, she whispered, her eyes shining with sudden, perfect tears. I am at rock bottom, and you're insulting me. You've always hated me. You've always been jealous of me. Jealous of what, Haley? Carlotta pushed herself off the fridge. Her breathing was shallow, fast. She felt dizzy, ungrounded. She wasn't delivering a triumphant speech. Her voice was too shrill, bordering on hysterical. Jealous of your bankruptcies? Jealous that Dad treats you like a helpless toddler? Get out, both of you. Get the fuck out of my house. Abel stood up slowly. He was not a tall man, but in that moment, he seemed to absorb all the light in the room. He stepped around the kitchen island. Carlotta instinctively took a step back, her bare foot hitting the leg of a chair. You listen to me, you selfish little brat, Abel said, pointing a finger directly at her face. The smell of peppermint was thick, almost suffocating. I am your father. I raised you. I put a roof over your head. You owe me. You owe this family. You think because you have a fancy title and a view of the river that you're better than us? I don't owe you a $3 million penthouse, Carlotta screamed. It tore her throat. She didn't care. You didn't pay for my college. You didn't help me with my business. You didn't even call me on my birthday last month. You want a house for Haley? Buy her one yourself. Abel's hand lashed out. For a split second, Carlotta flinched, bracing for a strike. Instead, he grabbed the water glass off the counter and hurled it into the sink. The glass shattered with a violent crash, shards exploding against the stainless steel, water splashing across Carlotta's shirt. She let out a sharp, involuntary cry, throwing her hands up to protect her face. The silence that followed was suffocating. Only the sound of the rain and the slow drip of water from the faucet. Carlotta lowered her hands. She looked at the broken glass glittering in the sink. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She felt humiliated. She felt violated. She looked at her father, who was breathing heavily, his face flushed dark red. "Get out," Carlotta said again. This time, it wasn't a scream. It was a hollow, dead sound. "If you are not in that elevator in 10 seconds, I am calling the police." Haley looked at Abel, her eyes wide, the victim act momentarily dropping to reveal genuine panic. "Dad." Abel stared at Carlotta. The rage in his eyes slowly morphed into something colder, something calculated. He straightened his coat, buttoning it with deliberate, agonizing slowness. "You're making a mistake, Carlotta," he said quietly. He reached out and picked up the manila envelope, tucking it back into his coat. "A very big mistake. You think you don't need us. You think you're untouchable up here in your glass tower. We'll see how untouchable you are when you have no one." He turned and walked toward the foyer. Haley followed, pausing only to snatch her designer bag off the sofa. She didn't look at Carlotta as she hurried past. Carlotta stood frozen by the kitchen island, watching them. The elevator doors slid open. Abel turned back just before stepping inside. His eyes swept over the living room, the view, the expensive furniture. Then, he looked dead at Carlotta. "You've got a week to change your mind," Abel said. "After that, we do this the hard way." The steel doors slid shut. The apartment was instantly plunged back into silence. Carlotta stood there for a long time. She listened to the hum of the HVAC unit. She looked at the wet spots on the floor where Haley's umbrella had dripped. She looked at the shards of glass in her sink. Her legs finally gave out. She slid down the front of the cabinets, the cold wood pressing against her spine, until she hit the floor. She pulled her knees to her chest, resting her forehead on her arms. She didn't cry. Crying would mean they had broken her. Instead, she sat in the dim light, shivering in her damp shirt, listening to the rain, and wondering what her father meant by the hard way. She wouldn't have to wait a week to find out. By Tuesday, he had already set the fire. Tuesday morning tasted like stale espresso and copper. Carlotta hadn't slept for more than 45 minutes at a stretch since her father and sister walked out of her elevator. Every time she drifted off, her brain served up an involuntary slideshow of Abel's reddening face and the sound of breaking glass. She was sitting at her dining table, staring blindly at a quarterly logistics spreadsheet, when the heavy, muffled buzz of her phone vibrated against the mahogany wood. The caller ID read concierge, front desk. Carlotta cleared her throat. It felt like it was lined with sandpaper. "Yes, Thomas?" "Miss Murray," Thomas said. His usually crisp, professional voice carried a tight edge of discomfort. "I'm sorry to disturb you. There is a gentleman down here trying to serve you with legal papers. Building policy dictates we don't let process servers pass the lobby without your consent, but he is quite insistent." A cold sweat broke out across Carlotta's collarbones. The spreadsheet on her monitor blurred. The hard way. "Send him up," she managed to say. 3 minutes later, a bored-looking man in a damp windbreaker handed her a thick stack of stapled papers, turned on his heel, and got back into the elevator without a word. The papers felt heavy, the cheap printer paper coarse against her fingertips. She closed the heavy door, threw the deadbolt, and looked at the front page. Abel Murray v. Carlotta Murray. Complaint for breach of oral contract, fraudulent inducement, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Petition for constructive trust, and lis pendens. Carlotta read the words, but they didn't connect to meaning right away. She walked mechanically to the sofa and sat down. She read the first page again, then the second. Her father wasn't just suing her for the penthouse. He was claiming he had provided the initial $100,000 seed money for Carlotta's first business venture a decade ago, a blatant, verifiable lie, and that they had an oral agreement that this penthouse would serve as his retirement property in exchange. He had filed a lis pendens, a notice of a pending lawsuit, directly on the title of her home. He had effectively frozen her property. She couldn't sell it, couldn't refinance it, couldn't even take out a line of credit against it until the lawsuit was resolved. Her phone buzzed again. A text from her cousin Mark. "Hey, you need to look at Facebook." Carlotta's stomach dropped. She opened the app, which she hadn't checked in months. Right at the top of her feed was a post from Haley, tagged with 20 different family members. It was a masterclass in weaponized victimhood. "I never thought I'd be posting something so painful," Haley had written, complete with a broken heart emoji. "As many of you know, I'm going through a devastating divorce. In my darkest hour, I turned to my sister for temporary shelter. Not only did Carlotta refuse to let me sleep on her couch, but she physically threatened our father when he tried to intervene. Money changes people. Praying for her soul, but we have to cut toxic people out of our lives." Below it, the comments were a rolling feed of vitriol. Aunts, uncles, and family friends Carlotta hadn't seen since she was 15 were tearing her apart. Selfish, ungrateful. I always knew she was a snob. Carlotta didn't throw her phone. She didn't scream. Her reaction was entirely pathetically biological. She stood up, walked calmly to the guest bathroom, dropped to her knees on the cold hexagonal marble tiles, and violently threw up her morning coffee. She knelt there for a long time, the smell of bile and mint toothpaste burning her nostrils. Her hands were shaking so violently she could barely grip the edge of the toilet bowl to pull herself up. This wasn't a business negotiation. This wasn't a ruthless competitor trying to undercut her shipping rates. This was the man who taught her how to ride a bike. This was the sister whose hair she used to braid. They were trying to destroy her reputation, her finances, and her sanity, all because she wouldn't hand over the life she built. Carlotta washed her face with freezing water, staring at her pale, drawn reflection in the mirror. The red rimming her eyes made her look feral. The cynical, untouchable shell she wore to survive in the corporate world had shattered, leaving behind a terrifying, raw vulnerability. But as she wiped her face with a heavy linen towel, the panic began to curdle. The icy dread in her stomach began to heat up, melting into a dense, solid block of rage. She walked out of the bathroom, picked up her phone, and dialed a number she rarely used for anything other than corporate acquisitions. "David," Carlotta said when her attorney answered. Her voice was no longer shaking. It was dead flat. "I need you to look at a filing in civil court, and then I need you to draft a countersuit. Defamation, extortion, and filing a frivolous lien." "Carlotta?" David's voice was sharp. "Who is the plaintiff?" "My father," she said. She looked at the stack of legal papers on her coffee table. "I want to bury him." The conference room at David's law firm smelled faintly of lemon polish and expensive, ozone-tinged recycled air. It was a sterile, intimidating environment designed to make people feel small. Carlotta sat on one side of the massive mahogany table, her spine perfectly straight against the stiff leather chair. She was wearing a tailored charcoal suit armor. Her hair was pulled back tightly. She focused her eyes on the grain of the wood in front of her, tracing the dark lines, refusing to look at the frosted glass doors. The door handle clicked. Abel and Haley walked in, flanked by a lawyer who looked entirely too young and deeply uncomfortable in his ill-fitting suit. Carlotta's chest tightened, a momentary lapse in her armor. Abel looked older. It had only been 3 weeks since the ambush in her kitchen, but the lines around his mouth were deeper, his skin carrying a grayish, exhausted pallor. He smelled like cheap dry-cleaning chemicals and the sharp tang of sweat. Haley was unusually subdued. She wasn't carrying a designer bag. Her roots were showing, a stark line of dishwater blonde against the expensive platinum. The credit cards had clearly been frozen. They sat down across from Carlotta. Abel wouldn't meet her eyes. Haley glared at the table. "Let's skip the pleasantries," David said, leaning forward. He didn't offer a handshake. He slid a thick, blue-backed folder across the table toward Abel's young attorney. "This is a motion for sanctions. A motion to dismiss your client's entirely fabricated lawsuit and our counterclaims. Mr. Murray, You perjured yourself on a sworn affidavit when you claimed you provided my client with $100,000 in 2014. We have the bank records proving you had less than $4,000 in your accounts at that time. Abel's jaw tightened. He shifted in his seat, the leather squeaking loudly in the quiet room. Furthermore, David continued, his voice smooth and devoid of mercy, we have documented evidence of extortion. You explicitly demanded my client sign over real property under the threat of doing things the hard way, which you subsequently followed up with a fraudulent lis pendens. It wasn't extortion, Abel snapped, his voice rough. He finally looked at Carlotta, his eyes burning with a mixture of anger and desperation. It's a family matter. We had an understanding. You have no proof of an understanding, the young attorney mumbled, looking at the documents David had handed him. He looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Abel, I told you. Shut up, Abel hissed at his own lawyer. He leaned across the table toward Carlotta. You're really going to do this? You're going to drag your own father through court? You're going to bankrupt me over a misunderstanding? Carlotta looked at him. The urge to shrink, to apologize, to smooth things over a deeply ingrained reflex from 30 years of seeking his approval flared up in her chest. It tasted like ash. She swallowed it down. You did this, Dad, Carlotta said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried across the room. You came into my home. You demanded my property. You lied to a judge. You let Haley drag my name through the mud with our entire extended family. I was desperate, Haley cried out, finally speaking. Her voice cracked. I have nothing, Carlotta. You have everything. Why do you have to be so greedy? Greedy? Carlotta let out a short, hollow laugh. I didn't ask for a single thing from either of you, just to be left alone. She turned her gaze back to her father. I'm not dropping the countersuit unless you withdraw your claim today, sign a binding non-disclosure agreement regarding me and my finances, and remove the lien. If you don't, David will submit this to the judge at 9 a.m. tomorrow. You will pay my legal fees, you will face sanctions for perjury, and I will take whatever equity is left in your house. Abel stared at her. The bluster, the patriarchal authority he had wielded over her for her entire life, slowly drained out of him. He looked at David, then at his own lawyer, who gave him a grim, barely perceptible nod. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Carlotta heard the erratic, rapid tapping of Haley's fingernails against the mahogany table. Fine, Abel breathed. The word sounded like a tire deflating. Where do I sign? The next 20 minutes were a blur of rustling paper and the scratching of heavy ink pens. No one spoke. The air was heavy with the toxic, stagnant energy of a fatal car crash. When it was done, Abel stood up. He didn't put his coat on, he just held it bunched in his fist. He looked at Carlotta one last time. There was no apology in his eyes, only a cold, hardened resentment. You're no daughter of mine, he said. His voice was steady now, cold. Carlotta felt a violent physical ache behind her ribs, a phantom pain for something that was being amputated. But she didn't look away. I know, Carlotta said. She watched them walk out of the conference room. The heavy glass door clicked shut, sealing them on the other side. Carlotta didn't celebrate with David. She declined his offer for a drink. She took a town car back to her building, rode the private elevator up in silence, and stepped into her foyer. The penthouse was exactly as she had left it. The gray light of late afternoon filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The oak floors were dry. The kitchen counter was spotless. It was completely, utterly quiet. Carlotta walked to the window and pressed her forehead against the cool glass, looking down at the crawling traffic and the darkening river. She had won. She had protected her home, her assets, her sanctuary. She wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the crisp fabric of her suit jacket. She was safe. She was untouchable. And as the sun dipped below the skyline, casting long, sharp shadows across the empty living room, she had never felt so entirely, profoundly alone. Have you ever had to draw a line in the sand with your own family? Drop a comment below and let me know how you handled the guilt trips. If Carlotta's story resonated with you, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss part 3 and 4, where her father takes things to a terrifying new level. Share this with someone who needs a reminder to protect their peace.